Yeah.
Okay, so you'll have some people that they'll have questions and stuff, so we'll have like a Q&A session too.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Cool. Then before we get started, am I missing anything, or how do you want me to introduce you? By the way,
You can just call me Alexandros Filth if you'd like.
Alexandros Filth.
Yep. Filth is actually a Greek word. It means I eat.
Yeah, that makes sense actually in a lot of the books I've read. Okay. Um, Root words are fun to play with too. Okay, so before we get started, anything else I should know or like that?
Um, no, not really. I mean, nothing I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay. You ready to hit the live stream?
Yeah, I'm all ready to go.
Okay. And you said you wanted to turn your video off, right?
With that?
You wanted to turn your video off? You
Oh
and not?
well, you can run the video. I'm just going to move over so that it can't be seen directly in the video.
Oh no, well you should be able to just hit this little button and your camera will just show your name.
Yeah, but it's no fun. Then nobody has anything to look at.
Well, I was gonna leave mine on, but yeah, okay. Now another thing here is your name is showing up.
Oh, that's
As
fine.
Siva Nivek.
Yeah, that's perfectly all right.
Okay. All right then. Alexandros Phil. All right, here we go. Start recording now. All right, guys, welcome back. This is Dustin Emos of DustinEmos.com, and I'm joined by Alexandros Phil. Now, honestly, this is going to be a kind of a surprise. We were talking a little bit about like innovative technologies. You know, guys, I like to cover that kind of thing, disruptive technologies, things that can change the world. And he's piqued my curiosity, so we're gonna jump in. We're gonna have a Q&A session because I'm recording this, but he's actually live streaming it on his end. I don't know how to. If anyone wants to reach out and help me out with that. But man, if you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll jump into it.
Yeah. So you can just call me Alexandros Filth. You already did a pretty good introduction so far. I am a former Marine veteran, and I went through electronics training school through the United States Marine Corps, and I learned quite a bit about circuit technology and the basics of like electronic theory, transistor theory, and so on. And while I was in, I was very curious to learn more about everything because originally, when I graduated high school, I was interested in neurology, and neurology really piqued my interest because uh, it's just the human brain is absolutely fascinating. What allows us the faculties to be able to use and create language, logic, reason, and then growing up and learning about computers and seeing everything in the world the way that I saw it, it became more and more fascinating to me as I grew up. But seeing the climate and how everything in the world had changed, I knew that I had a greater responsibility to also consider what was also going on around me. So I decided to join the military and specifically the United States Marine Corps. So I pursued electronics when I was in there, and as I said, I learned a great degree. And when I got out, I thought that, well, what better way to help and continue my work than to continue to develop specific, very very specific technologies as they pertain to not just electronics but computers as well. And if you want to talk about disruptive technologies, let me just put one down right now. It's really simple. It's called a zero-day exploit. Have you heard of such a thing?
That's the kind of thing that can wipe out the entire internet, right?
Well, a zero-day exploit is just any kind of electronic exploit that has the ability to severely impact our electronic lifestyle as it pertains to computers, the World Wide Web, banking, any sophisticated electronic system. You could say that a zero-day exploit, for example, would be an EMP, right? If you had a simple way to deliver an EMP strategically, that would be a zero-day exploit, for example. It wouldn't necessarily have to be a computer bug, right? But specifically, what I'm working on could be considered the computer bug variety, and it applies to all computer systems that are in use today all over the world, all of them, all at once.
Wow. Okay, so you can't leave us hanging there. What
Yeah.
is this about?
Okay, so right around the 1940s, there was a very, very ingenious man. His name was um, John von Neumann, and you can do a little bit of research about him, but he's probably one of the last great geniuses that's been born in quite some time, up there with the likes of Tesla and so on. And he was a great visionary as well. And he worked on the original programmable computers, the ENIAC and the EDVAC. And in fact, he also worked with another gentleman that people are probably familiar with the name of, who is Alan Turing. And Alan Turing, we know that. Yep, that's
Turing
right.
machine, yeah.
That's correct. Yeah. So John von Neumann and Turing were literally at the forefront of all computing technology when it first came out. This is of course way after Babbage, but he designed a kind of computing architecture that would make it simple and easy for the computers to be built, manufactured, varieties of car, and you're going to end up with having five different schools with five different types of engineers for each one of those cars. So John von
But I knew nothing about it.
Yeah. So John von Neumann's architecture type basically has some very basic instructions on how to design a computer that can handle digital bits, which is just ones and zeros, binary code. However, what I feel certain that he was aware of, but was not going to make other people privy to, was that there was a bottleneck in the von Neumann architecture. And what I mean by that is when you send a instruction to your microprocessor, you can't see it. It's like a black box. So it goes into the microprocessor, the processor does its job, and it spits back out the information. It's a one-way system. Information goes in, it does its thing, and information comes out. That is the bottleneck. The computer cannot send and receive information duplex, not like a telephone system can, not like what we're doing right now. In fact, I'm going live on three devices at once. Yeah, and it's all on the same internet connection, which is really fantastic. And the reason why I have to use three devices is because of the von Neumann bottleneck. Otherwise, I could just go live on all three applications on my phone all at once, and there wouldn't be a problem. So I've found an exploit that actually transforms the von Neumann architecture and breaks the von Neumann bottleneck and will allow anyone to be able to do lots more on their devices, their modern devices, than would normally be applicable or allowable.
Wow. Okay. So that, I mean, I can already see like a lot of potential there.
Correct. Yeah.
Please go for it.
So the applications are not all wonderful, right? Of course, all the medical applications it will have, all the scientific discoveries that it will lead to. Yeah, in a contextual base, let's just call it in a simplistic form, virtual quantum computing, right? Because what we do with a regular quantum computer now turns a standard transistor into the double slit experiment, which basically, if you know anything about the double slit experiment, it allows the single transistor to become an inveritable infinite quanta of outputs.
I didn't know that part of it, the technical aspect, but I
Yeah,
remember reading and watching videos about it where they could, and it was something about like you're perceiving and change the output.
it's
That was
more.
what was
Yeah,
fascinating consciousness.
it's a little bit more than that. But the computer has absolute focus. That's the real key. Everybody thinks that computers are more powerful than humans. They're really not. The hardware is very limited, and so there's only millions, and in fact now there's trillions of transistors inside of most microprocessors nowadays. But they're still not anywhere near sophisticated enough to be able to beat one axon and neuron inside the human brain in its sophistication and its ability to process information and recognize patterns. So yeah, even this technology, even my software has its limitations, and so I'm not worried about like a Skynet type situation. But what I am concerned about is that because it makes hardware that much more powerful, those that know how to use their hardware well already will be able to leverage it against all kinds of people, and it won't necessarily be in good ways.
What are you afraid of? Like, what are some of the examples?
Okay, well, let's just say, for example, you could send a little bit of code to every single satellite in orbit all at once and then make them crash.
Okay, so we're talking some serious
It's
danger.
It's a real 0-day exploit. And it's because it affects the hardware at such a fundamental level. It affects all modern hardware. In fact, um, what I've designed is for x86 32-bit and 64-bit machines. However, if you're using a 32-bit machine, you could reconfigure the software to work on a much smaller device. You could make it work on a 16-bit, an 8-bit, and so on and so forth. And in fact, I'm very curious because they're working on Babbage's machine right now. They're building the analytical engine in real life. I'm very curious to see if it will be capable of running on Babbage's mechanical computer, which would be fantastic. In a way, let me just give a brief explanation without getting too technical into it. So most software, a human has to initiate the software. I have to tell the software, I have to give it a command, and I say, okay, go, right? And to some degree, we can automate that, but even still, the human has to initiate that. I have to say, I have to put in a few lines of code that runs this loop and says, okay, when information goes in, it's going to go here or it's going to go there, right? And so that automation process still has to be initiated by a human, and it still requires certain laws and rules, logic base, that allows the hardware to do its thing. What I'm doing is I'm creating a computer inside of the computer, a Turing complete machine within the Turing complete machine in its own language. And what this does is it basically turns the computer into a computer and a printer, where the computer prints instructions to itself to manage itself better. So let's say, for example, in the same way that I look in the mirror in the morning and I've got a zit and I'm like, oh man, I look terrible. Let me pop this zit and put some medicine on, and my appearance will be a little bit better, right? The computer kind of will have the same kind of ability. It will be able to see its own code, self-awareness, and see that there's a problem, and it will be able to repair that problem or change its matrix so that it can better, I guess you could say, move that problem around.
So we're talking, so I understand course correction, but not necessarily like creativity.
Correct. Yeah. It still falls under some very, very finite rules. In fact, the correct term for it would be oh uh, non-deterministic finite automata. So think about when a baby's born, how the baby is completely blind and is kind of crawling around and trying to figure out what's going on in the world. The computer is actually inside of a much larger city, the microprocessor, which has millions and millions of transistors in it, right? And so the electricity is kind of crawling around trying to figure out its way inside the machine to do the job that it's being asked to do. And so it's very, very small. It fits inside the microprocessor. So it uses up roughly 1 to 2% of the microprocessor's total power, its capacity. And so everything else, Windows will still work, Linux will still work, Android will still work, iOS will still work. It'll still do the same functions, it'll still work the same way. It will just work better. Because what the software does is it manages the hardware at the very lowest level.
It's very fine tuning right there.
Yeah, well, here's the deal. So when John von Neumann came up with the idea of the von Neumann architecture, I'm not sure he was aware about how far we would actually take the microprocessor before we came up with some innovations that kind of would break that architecture, or we'd come up with a better idea. So we actually got really, really far. We've created, okay, to put it in perspective, we've created cities on microchips that are 3 to 10 times the size of Tokyo in sophistication. So
We've come a long way with what we have with these computers.
correct.
Whereas we haven't gone to that next thing that just completely destroys this whole system and makes the start of something new.
Absolutely. So if you think about it, if a human, we can design and we can build a city. We've done it, right? And we've built these microchips. But do you think a human, how long would it take us to build a software traffic management system, which we haven't done, by the way, that is capable of managing a city like Tokyo in a very efficient manner? We haven't done it, have we? So do you think that the software that we're currently using to manage the hardware that we have, do you think, because it's made by humans, do you think that it's actually doing a very good job?
Yeah, they can barely get the traffic lights to work right.
There you go. So what I'm doing is I'm making a traffic management system for the hardware that we currently have. And what it does is it writes the software. It writes the management system for every single processor. That's why it's a zero-day exploit, because it works on every piece of hardware in existence.
Okay, so we kind of, I guess I kind of have basic grasp of how big this is. Where do you want to take this thing? What's possible? What can we
Well,
do with it?
I'll tell you what my original purpose and intent was, because that's really what matters when it comes to any kind of new technology. When somebody invents something, what was the purpose and intent behind it? Nuclear energy, its purpose and intent was to help mankind, and of course, we kind of went awry there. The purpose and intent behind this is to gift mankind with faster than light travel. And no, I'm not kidding.
Okay, so you have to explain that one.
Yeah. There was a gentleman who theorized about the possibility of being able to shift or warp space itself. So if you think about matter, everything that we can see and touch, everything that's real that we say that is real in the world, we can call that counter space, right? Because it's not space, and everything that's in between that is space. Okay. So think about matter not as the river, but think about the matter as the crumbs that are scattered in the flow of the river. And space is the river. There is no place in the universe that space does not touch itself. It's a true fact. You can't get away from it. So if we say that the universe is expanding and it's infinitely large, then what does that mean? It means that space must travel faster than light by a very large magnitude, in fact. So if I was going to play a part like Pecos Bill, right, and I took my magic lasso and I said, "Oh, come here, her tornado," right, and I lassoed onto that tornado, I could actually grab onto the force of nature itself and kind of latch on for a ride, couldn't I? And that's essentially what my technology does. Is it lets you, because in space there's nothing holding you in any one place. There's no inertial forces that are pushing you in any one direction unless you have something that actually pushed you in that direction to begin with, right? We're talking about the forces of inertia and laws of thermodynamics, and it goes back to Newton's laws. Inertia, an object at motion stays in motion unless acted upon by an outside force. An object at rest stays at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. So all objects, all masses, all counter space is enacting itself equally on all objects in the vacuum of space equally. And so if you wanted to fall, let's say, right, because there's no up, down, left, right, forward, backward in space, then what you would have to do is find a way to sort of let inertia fall away from you. It stop grabbing onto you. And that's how this works. Is you would just kind of point yourself in the direction you want to go and make a hole, and you would just fall. And you would fall as fast as space is moving. You'd literally just drop right into the river stream.
So it would almost be like just teleporting to the next
Well,
place.
yeah, that's the end of my technology, and I'm not ready to give that to mankind. And the truth behind that is that we're not responsible enough to tie our own shoes and not kill ourselves on our own planet and destroy our resources. So a technology like that would be terribly weaponizable. So that's one of the reasons why I have to be very careful about what I talk about and the direction that I kind of point mankind in with this technology. But the end of it is that mankind is not capable of manipulating a spacecraft that is traveling 10,000 times the speed of light through space. Who wants to drive it? Raise your hand. Not me. Yeah. Well, see, objects in space are not going to stop moving. They're going to continue to move, even though you're moving relatively fast compared to all the counter space that's actually still spinning around the center of the universe, right? And is expanding outwards. So you're going to have to make course corrections and think 5, 10, 15 moves ahead. Well, human can't do that. We lack the focus to do that. Remember what I said about the software? It has absolute focus. That's the real purpose behind the software. That's the reason why I invented the software in the first place, was to provide us a navigable capability for the future of spaceflight.
Okay. Well, so how difficult is this to use? Like, to utilize this kind of thing? Are you talking millions of production? Are you talking DIY at home? I mean, what do we?
Yeah, I mean, I'm poor. I'm dirt poor. I'm doing this on a shoestring budget. I'm just putting ones and zeros together. It's the base software is called the terminal, And the terminal, which is the management software, is 4 million bits. Now, to put that in perspective, 4 million bits, not bytes, okay? 8 bits is in a byte. So 4 million bits is about half a megabyte. So you can fit this on a 3.5-inch floppy with room to spare. That's old tech. And I'm basically writing this on a very, very old x86 32-bit laptop that runs on a battery. And I chose this laptop specifically because the software leverages the superscalar capabilities of the Intel Pentium processor and processors that are produced afterwards. And what this means is that it manipulates a triangle wave, an electromagnetic wave that actually passes every time there's an electrical conduction that goes across a conductor inside the microprocessor. There's an electromagnetic field that passes around it. You'd learn this in regular middle school and elementary science. You know, you take a wire, you pass electricity through it, and you get a magnetic field around that wire, right? And that's happening inside your microprocessor, but at a very, very, very small scale. So what I'm doing is I'm initiating that magnetic field to actually make everything happen. I'm no longer using electricity to make the processor work. I'm actually making the electricity do the work for me. It's automating itself. And what this means is this triangle wave, it can actually sort of climb up other circuits. It will permeate every part of the computer. Your sound card, the firmware that's inside of your disc player, the controller chip that's inside of your video controller just behind the LCD. It will manage every single component that's inside of a computer, including the DC power supply. So imagine a 60 hertz signal. Now, what is HF? What is high frequency radio? If you're going to do like a radio broadcast, well, that's about 60 hertz, isn't it? Somewhere in that range. So that's low frequency propagation, by the way. High frequency is somewhere in the range anywhere from like 10 to 15 or so megahertz, million hertz. So if I can run 60 hertz and this can climb up that signal path, then of course it no longer needs a regular Ethernet connection to be able to make connections to other machines and propagate. And now you understand why I'm doing it on a specialized machine, because I don't want that to happen.
Okay, so you're talking form of internet as well.
Correct. Yeah, that's exactly one of our goals that our organization has, is to provide a global free internet service provider for everyone.
Okay, so how do we get this provable to the world, and how do we start using it?
Yeah. So right now, we're just trying to release our app so that we can get everybody on the same page and get everybody in the world free speech. In the old days, we had telephones, and you would pay what's called long distance service fee. And the long distance service fee was actually a big ruse, a big lie. It was just a way that the governments got together and they agreed that people that weren't wealthy would not be able to use telephone and contact people long distances. So the very wealthy would be able to use this, obviously, because they could afford it, and they were concerned about the low lifes, the people like us, climbing up the food chain too quickly, and of course overtaking the government and that sort of thing. So that we don't have long distance service anymore because they've got different systems of controls in place that prevent us from being able to do these things and get famous too quickly and get the word out and warn people and so on and so forth. So that's one of the reasons why I'm having this broadcast, is I want to make sure I sort of pass this information along to other individuals. What we're doing is we're kind of reinventing the telephone service with this app, and we're making it so that we can break the ties that bind everybody by sort of breaking that long distance service contract. So think about it like you would use this app in China. Now, China has controls on their population where there's certain IPs that they can't use, servers they're not allowed to connect to, they can't use certain US services, etc. We're going to get around that. We're going to allow them to access US services so that they can have the right of the freedom of speech, which is available here in the United States, anywhere in the world by using this app.
That's massive, and they definitely want it. They're doing all the crypto, even though the government doesn't want them to.
Correct. Yeah. And you can't stop them. So we're just going to facilitate that. And once that kind of happens, it will kind of scramble the fighters. It will put them on edge. Let's say let's just call them the cabal for now. It makes it easy. I can use one word, and everybody's familiar with it. So let's just say, basically, our goal is to set the cabal in a panic so that they're running around like chickens with their heads cut off and not paying attention to what me and my organization are doing. And that's when we're going to start releasing our software, which is absolutely free, by the way. I'm not making anyone pay for it.
You picked a great time to do
You know, actually, I was sitting with my hands, under my butt for a while and trying to figure out how I was going to solve this problem. And the software just kind of came to me like an epiphany, and I was like, okay, this could work. And then, I started doing some reading, started doing some studying. I talked to some academics, and come to find out that it's very viable. And there are people who have attempted to do it before, but not to the scale that I'm getting ready to do it on. Um, but that's neither here nor there. But essentially, the technology is the way I'm releasing it is very clever because I can't let it fall into the wrong hands. Let me explain myself just a little bit. So, um, let's say I write a book and I encode the book so that no one can read it. Now, the contents of the book, even if you can't read it, just looking through it because of the symbology, kind of changes things in the world. It shows people something. It sets a precedent. The imagery and so on, the characters. So those that are trying to figure it out are going to have all these high-paid individuals that are going to be picking through it and trying to decipher it and figure it out. But of course, their focus is on money. Their focus is on getting paid. Their focus isn't on the curiosity and the reason why the book was written. So it's not the software that I'm writing; it's how I'm writing it that's important. And that's why it's taking me so long because I have to be very careful in how I manufacture it, not just what I'm making. So think about it like in the old days, there. Well, actually, that's not very far away from me. There's a place called Bedford, Virginia. I don't know if you've heard of the Beale cipher. It's one of the most famous ciphers in the world.
that. Yeah, that's the one that's uncrackable, right?
Supposedly, yeah. Well, they've actually got one guy. He used the Declaration of Independence, and he cracked one of the pages, one of the three pages, and the other two have yet been undeciphered. And so nobody knows exactly where the treasure is, right? And they don't know who the family is of the posse that got lost when they went out and didn't come back. So those are the last two pages that haven't been deciphered. So in a same kind of way, I'm using a kind of encipherment so that when I release the software, it's going to be free. Everybody can download it. Everybody can use the software, but they won't be able to just pick it apart and figure out how it works.
The first thing that comes to mind is like just when these sort of things happen, it seems like everyone just immediately, or not immediately, but there's a delay, and then everyone is suddenly start using the technology. Like they crack the code eventually, and then it becomes weaponized and controlled and everything else. But uh, just so that we're clear, you're not suicidal, right?
No, not at all. Absolutely. And if you hear that I'm actually committing suicide or something along those lines, then you should be extremely worried. Yeah, all of my notes and everything are here. And that's why I published my information online. I've got a Reddit post with my white paper and so on that talks about the basics of the software. And as time goes on, I'm going to add additional information for the curious. In case something happens to me, the flame of my work doesn't die with me.
That's. I mean, if you're the bottleneck, they're going to take you out if they think this is legitimate.
Yeah. With tip-
By the way, if you're on my show, they're going to be aware of you for sure.
oh, fantastic! Great news.
Yeah, you're brave, man.
Yeah. So what the name of the software is actually really interesting. It's called $150 million.exe. And why I named it that is because it makes all hardware a factor of 10 more powerful than it currently is, and that's dependent on the physical hardware itself. So some devices will be more powerful than others because of specific features that are in that hardware that won't be necessarily in another. Because manufacturers of microchips, they change features often.
So the more you start with, the more you'll gain.
In a way, but it's designed so that you can't actually unlock the full features of the device unless you network with other individuals. So, like, think about it. Like, I have two phones here. They're both Samsungs. One's a Galaxy S6. One of them's a knockoff. It's a cheap $50 phone from Walmart. So the $50 phone won't be able to do much by itself, but by combining, right, if me and my friend have each of these devices, by combining our resources, we can actually mine more, we can do more, we can affect more with the two devices sort of working together like a node and a supercomputer node. So it's going to make people want to collaborate. And of course, people have more devices than big corporations and governments do. It's kind of like the gun problem. You can't take the guns from the people because we have too many of them. There you go. So, people will literally be able to leverage the entire global economy with this software, and they'll be able to take it right back, and it'll go right into their hands, to whom it which belongs, by the way, rightfully.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all about taking power from these concentrations and giving it back to people, especially when I can show people how to do it themselves, decentralize it.
Yeah. So the base software is actually kind of like DOS. If you think about the old days of DOS, it's just a terminal. It's just a blank screen with a little cursor on it, and you can use it to access the hardware directly. You can program and so on with it, but it's manual. Everything is manual input. You're basically giving instructions directly to the computer. What we're working on is an interface, which is a very small. It's 2 megabytes to put it in perspective. It won't quite fit on a 3.5 inch floppy, but it's very small, and it will be the operating system of the future. And it's designed to interface with the terminal, and that will also be provided for free to the general public. So the whole point is that the interface will be a browser OS. In other words, just like opening Firefox in Windows, normally when you open up Windows, you're already using roughly 1/3 of your system's resources just to run your operating system. And then when you run the browser and other things, it starts to clog things up and slow things down. Yeah, yeah. So this is going to revolutionize computing because you don't have to run an operating system anymore. You won't have to run Linux. You won't have to run uh, Android. You won't have to run iOS. You can decide to if you want. You can actually run those systems from the terminal interface, and you can still do the same things that you would normally, but they'll be run as a virtual machine, which means that anybody that's trying to infiltrate your device, hack your device, or get in will only be accessing a virtual machine in memory. They won't be accessing the device or the information that's stored on it.
Like a VPN, basically.
There you go. It's all built in. That's the way I designed it.
Okay, wow.
So it's completely anon. That's the whole point of the software is I wanted something that would give people their privacy back.
I mean, I don't follow all the technicals of it, but this is very exciting. I mean, I'm highly intrigued. What do you have a time frame on when you can get this out, or?
I'm looking at about 90 days. So about 90 days from now, if I can get it done faster, then I can get it done faster. Giving me money isn't going to make me do it any faster. Nothing really is going to make me do it any faster. It's I think I'm probably the only person that can do it at this point, and so I've just got to spend 6 hours a day in front of a computer just punching away.
Well, I got caffeine if you need any of that. But
Well, yeah, I get plenty of that. I sleep about 3 to 4 hours a night. So, and then I've got a family I'm raising at the same time. So it's harrowing. We're in a very rough time, and I think that's motivation enough for me at this time. But when I'm not programming and I need a break, and I've got to, this is what I like to do: is I like to tell people and give people good news and let them know that the world isn't over. There's good people out there that are still fighting, that are still trying to do good things.
even just a quick aside to that, with all the stuff going on with cryptos and at least the theory of what they're going to be capable of doing soon to kind of free the money system. I mean, that is going to, in a way, shrink governments 90%. And the inevitable eventuality, because governments can't stop it, is that they will no longer be able to survive on their debt, and then possibly not even be able to tax people at all. So eventually we'll get to that state. And that's this and all the stuff in politics and everything else. There seems to be a great awakening happening for sure.
Yeah.
Most exciting time to ever. I'm so happy to be doing what I do and during this time period.
It's very strange to be alive. I'll tell you that. It's a strange time to be alive and be in the world to be kind of at the center of a lot of different things.
Yeah. Well, I know we have people that may have some questions and stuff,
Yeah.
but is there anything else that you think we missed, or anything that we need to cover? And
I think a lot of people probably don't understand about crypto and what crypto is. And let me cover that real quick. There's a lot of folks out there because there's a lot of misinformation, and that's on purpose, of course. Uh, Crypto is not a fiat currency. Let me say that again. Crypto is not a fiat currency, and let me explain why. What's the building that you're in right now? What's it made out of?
Lumber and then shingles and all
Yep.
the usual
Where'd that come from?
forests.
Yeah, but who acquired that material?
Uh, I guess you mean originally, or you mean like the retail level?
You see what I mean? So human labor, human action had to be used to engineer. We had to think. We had to understand how to procure that, right? Then we had to go get it. Then we had to refine those materials. And then by the time that's all finished, how much are we really getting for the labor that we actually put into all that? I compare it to the cocaine trade. That's what I compare it to. Because the people that are actually growing the cocaine on the farms in Chile, they get probably about $4 US a day. And so on the street, cocaine a gram is going anywhere from somewhere to 65 to $120 a gram, depending on where you get it, right? Yeah. So there's and really the people that are pushing it didn't do anywhere near the work that the poor people that actually are getting paid for it. They're making chump change. So that's what most of the debt-based monetization that's actually makes the world go round. That's how most of it works, and that's the reason why labor is so valueless, is because our physical ability, our physical capability, our actionable value is based on debt.
Inflation is destroying it. Yeah.
It's more than just inflation; it's a taxation system on that same inflation.
Yeah, double whammy, and it's screwing the people and the value that they create out of that value.
Correct. And then there's a triple whammy of what's called the fractional reserve policies at each bank. So the banks never had any money to loan anybody in the first place. That's why you can actually sue your way out of a foreclosure, because the bank could never actually give you the loan to own that property in the first place. They never had the money. It's all
I've got
funny
a
money.
interesting interview with Ace of Coins coming up, and we're going to get into some of that too.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
So getting back to crypto, right? So why crypto is not fiat? So there's a guy, right, and he's shoveling sand into a sack, and he takes that sack down to his manager, and the manager puts it on a pallet with the other sacks of sand, and he sends it off to the wholesaler, and the wholesaler sells it to the refiner, right? And the refiner takes all those sacks of sand, pours them into a big furnace, and then melts them down and refines them and turns them into an ingot. And then he sells the ingot to a wholesaler on the international market, and then Intel, AMD, right, and so on and so forth. These companies buy them, and then they turn them into microchips, into wafers. So everything that crypto actually is representative of, including the poor mook that's sitting behind a device terminal right now, watching the nuclear power station to make sure it's not going to melt down. All of that energy, everything that culminates into crypto is based in human actionable value. It is not fiat. In fact, it's the opposite of fiat. Crypto is actually one of the most valuable commodities in the entire world, because it's based not just on human value, but on the energy it takes to maintain that human life. That's why crypto is so important to the future. But the problem with it right now is something called scaling, and scaling is basically it's a software issue, because we because of the way that we use the internet, because of the way the IoT, the Internet of Things, actually interacts with each other. There's a bigger solution that's required, and that's one of the reasons why the terminal is so important, because it kind of fixes a lot of those issues at the base level. Decentralization really is the solution to all of crypto's problems.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you completely, and I'm very very excited about some of this third generation stuff that's happening. Um, and I'm aware of the scaling issue. My dog's going crazy.
Yeah, it's okay.
I'm aware of the scaling issue. I kind of equate it to like the early days of like dial up and all that
Yep.
stuff. It's a temporary issue, and it's going to go away very quickly in a blink of an eye. We're going to be conveniently using cryptos like we're using cell phones now. It's amazing.
No, this is the concern. Okay, this is my concern, and it should be the concern of pretty much every consumer in the world. What we don't want, okay, is a beast system.
Centralized digital money.
Well, it's more than that because you can have a decentralized beast system, and it's just obfuscation. Um, we have the problem with the 1%. We've already talked about the cabal, how basically everything runs through them. They basically control everything that's going on in the world because they control all the world banking powers. They control the power, they control the value of our oil, our commodities, our energy, everything that's bought and sold. They control the value of farming. They control everything. So the same thing can still happen with the decentralized digital currency, but it will happen behind a closed curtain, um, outside of the scope and the view of most of the general public. And that's a really dangerous thing.
How do you mean? Like, how can they use the decentralized system that way?
Yeah.
I'm not disagreeing. I don't understand.
Yeah. Okay. We've got, let's say that 10% of the U.S. population is famous. In other words, they're like Hollywood stars, they're congressmen, they're House of Representatives, they're millionaires, right? They're very powerful and very well connected. Okay. So basically, they are afraid to lose everything they've got. That means they're very vulnerable and they can be very easily controlled. But they also have a very large amount of the system's resources. So you can have a decentralized systems and allow those individuals to be influencers on the people that are underneath of them, right? And it will appear to be decentralized. They will be promoting, yep, they will be promoting these different altcoins. They'll be promoting these coins and saying, look, this is a good thing, and getting them kind of reeled in like fishing.
Bitcoin is having a lot of that issue right now. As I understand it, and I know China had a flood that wiped out like a lot of their hash power, but as I understand it, the big company, the top two companies, if they allied, they could take over the whole system.
Correct. And what I'm almost certain that they are actually planning on doing just that. And well, they won't, and I'll tell you why. They need Bitcoin gone because it's the power player. Once they get rid of Bitcoin, they can roll in with whatever they want, and then it'll be the next big dog in the system. And that's their real plan. That's what everybody needs to watch out for. If your baby boomers are listening, pay attention because that's exactly what's going on.
I don't think Bitcoin's going to be the winner anyway. I talk about it because people they need to get that first step.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
Well,
name that recognizes.
I'm going to be honest with you. I think that we should hold on to Bitcoin as long as we can, and it's going to need the support of the general global populace because the people that are behind it are not bad, and they don't have bad intentions for the system. Otherwise, we would have seen that already. And if we allow them to kind of take that from us, what's actually going to happen is all the people that are in it right now are going to drop out and they're going to find something else. And then we lose that whole support group to all these other altcoins. And that's kind of a problem. You see what I'm saying now, how it comes into full picture, how it comes to full into view.
To give people a little context here, we know about how the cabal works, and they use every dirty trick in the book to force people to do things, and we know how difficult it would be to resist that. So if they were to like take these top two hash companies, I'm sure that they
Litecoin.
have other
Yeah.
people's mining power with them, but
Yep.
they control it. If they were to take those two top companies, find the CEOs or whatever the leaders, and then take their kids, that's just two kidnappings, and you've got all power of Bitcoin.
Well, they don't even have to do that. That's the beauty of it. They can just basically give them, open threats, and it's not that difficult to do. I mean, these people they work in this system. It's literally we're already in the age of the beast system because you can't do anything. Look at how many homeless people we have. You can't do anything without the dollar. Everybody's dependent on the dollar. The whole world is actually. And so once you collapse the petrodollar, which that's the real goal right now, is they're trying to collapse the petrodollar to instigate a collapse in the economy so they can restart the they're going to pull a George Soros so they can buy up everything on the U.S. stock exchange for pennies on the dollar, and they're going to do it with this new digital currency. That's how they work. They create a problem, and then they say, "Oh, look, we have the solution to this big problem," and that's what this is going to be. But they're not going to use one coin; they're going to use a bunch of altcoins, get everybody involved, right? And then they'll just crash out the altcoins and come up with this one global digital currency that they control, but it'll look like a decentralized currency. That's my concern. That's why I'm in a rush and trying to get this software out as fast as I can.
I keep trying to brainstorm ways to create more widespread adoption and the sticky factor. And I'm hoping to meet, I've kind of spoke to, but I'm really hoping to interview and meet John McAfee about this
Oh
because
my God, you and me both. You and me
he's the
both.
foremost trying to push for that. And
Yeah,
I would really like to brainstorm some ideas with him.
yeah, definitely. Well, he's a pretty smart guy, and he went to college right around here. and he's well aware of what's going on. But I think he's just as afraid as most of us. He knows that they're already trying to get him extradited, and put him in prison because he's well connected and he's not going to buy. He's not going to buy what they're selling.
Integrity.
Yeah,
Absolutely. He'll take it. He'll die for it. But I hope that doesn't happen.
yeah, that makes two of us. Well, you got any questions?
Uh, well, my only real question, is what can we do? But if we have people who have some questions, we can go to those.
I think that the biggest thing that we can do right now is everybody like us. We all need to be collaborating. We need to be getting on social media. We need to be influencers. We need to be doing what we're doing right now. We need
Those
to
networks are our only resistance, aren't they?
absolutely. It's so vitally important that we get this information out. We start talking about it. It's the most important thing that's going right now in the world in relative terms. We don't need to be worrying about what's going on with Hillary, with QAnon, with all this other bull crap. It's all a distraction. It's all meant to take our focus and our attention away from focusing on what's really going on. Is the power over our economy?
Okay, well, I would say that the Q thing has been pretty good fruit as far as for the trade doctrine to bring down some of those power players, and we're moving in that. Hopefully, we're moving in that direction. And they sort of, like I said earlier, it was a good time to do this because they're on the defensive, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't understand how Trump is doing it, how he's still alive, but he is somehow just winning after winning after winning. And it's I'm not tired yet, but at the same point, like I'm just kind of confused about it. I don't understand how he can stay so far ahead of these people.
I mean, like I said before, they've got their own. Every billionaire, anybody who has money has their own embedded networks, and it's been that way for quite some time. And the Rothschilds had it. Well, if you think about it, the Revolution, right? The French Revolution. That's how they killed England. That's how they got Britain to pay the war debt, which I mean they've recently just paid off finally. And they sent their informants back, and they sent these little whispers across the markets and said, "Oh no, Britain lost," but they didn't lose; they won. So then everybody was selling their
I
sterlings.
remember that, yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the elites bought up everything
Yep.
after they tanked the market with this room. Yeah.
Yep. And that Trump and any billionaire, anybody who has any kind of power and influence and money, has their own informant network. They have their own intelligence network, etc. And well, I mean, everybody already knows this, but Trump has his own personal bodyguards, that are not Secret Service, and that's already saved his life on more than one occasion, and that's been publicized. So there's a very good reason why he's being successful, and it's because he's not playing the same game that every other president has been playing. He's not playing with the same rules. He's not playing on the same board. He's not using the same pieces. Well, for the most part, anyway. I mean, there are some things that are just completely unavoidable.
Okay. Well, do you have anybody on your end that's asking questions that we want to get to?
No, not really.
Okay, so I'm my brain is just in full mode right now. I don't know how to keep up with this. I'm not even going to pretend to even. I can maybe solve a computer virus. That's about it. So, but at the same point, this is interesting. This is exciting. This is I don't know how to help you to get it out there. I think probably the best way is to ride the excitement of crypto in general, and then also throw on everything else that you can do with this and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, faster than light travel. I mean, that people are just going to look at that and not even believe it at first. So,
Well,
and
what I
I,
was
I
thinking.
really, faster than light travel is fascinating. I would like to see our species out in the stars and stuff, and exploring space, and acquiring resources, setting up colonies and stuff, because that would keep us alive in case the planet's never wiped out anyway. But like for me personally, I'm just a farmer. I don't really particularly care about going into space or faster than light travel. I've seen too many space movies where they end up stranded in space for billions and there's like barely enough oxygen and stuff. I don't want any of that. But some of the other stuff that you're talking about doing, like protecting computers from all of these, from any sort of a zero-day exploit, or taking advantage of some of this stuff to maximize our energy flow, or to help cryptos expand, or to create free speech options. I mean, anything. Like, let's get this going.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I just want to support.
the global economy has to grow, but it can't have inflation. And that's the key with crypto. That's what we're working on the solution for.
Those
The
are generally deflationary. So
Yeah, what we're working on is something called your coin, and it's the what we consider probably the future of all crypto because our goal is midterm. In 10 years, our goal is to basically have Earth in a situation called a Type One civilization, where
Yeah,
we are
Star Trek.
energy independent.
Yeah, yeah,
So
Star Trek.
yeah, it essentially means that farmers like you, you'll be producing your own energy. You'll be energy independent, and everything in the economy of the future is dependent on energy. You think about it. I want gold. Well, okay, I have to grow food. Well, if I want to grow food, I have to have healthy soil. If I want to have healthy soil, I need energy. I need robots. I need so on to actually do all that for me, right? And so forth. So everything is going to be based on energy and energy production. So midterm, around the 10-year mark, your coin is going to be the center of a global public energy-based exchange. So let's say Kenya, they start to get some of their people educated, and some kid comes up with this new novel form of energy production that's currently the cheapest form of energy production in the world, and it works in Kenya, but it won't really work anywhere else because they have a unique situation there or whatever it is, what have you. So now energy becomes, or I'm sorry, now Kenya becomes a global leader in the market, and so everybody's economy kind of bounces off of theirs. You see? So that's the idea behind your coin because it will allow us to expand the global economy without creating a deflationary system. So if you think about it, there are people that talk about a resource-based economy. This is very similar to a resource-based economic idea.
I love those people. I got my first red pill from the zeitgeist thing, but at the same point, I have to be like, well, while we still have money, that's sort of like communism with robots.
Yeah.
So what would your answer be for that?
The problem is that once we already have the taste of roboticism in our mouths, we've got Roombas, we've got automatic driving cars. It's not going away, buddy. The Amish, they're not, they might not adopt that stuff, but it's not going to affect them.
They have they just cheat. They just put a telephone at the end of their driveway.
You see what I mean? Yeah. So it's the same thing is going to happen, except this is the reason why it's so important that we get a movement going because societies are going to change, towns are going to change, cities are going to change, and the people have to have the financial freedom to be able to live a lifestyle that they want. And the current system that we have is not going to allow them to do that. It's not going to facilitate that. Robotics is coming, automation is coming. There's no way around it. You can't just say we're not going to, because people are just going to do it anyway.
I love the technological aspect of everything in the Venus Project and Zeitgeist. It's that centralized control of the resource distribution that bothers me.
So let me
You
let
know,
me ask, yeah, let me ask you a question, right? So we have an automated traffic service in our cities, and it does work, right? For the most part. There are idiots that defy the laws, and of course that's what causes the problems. And there are some technical issues that are part of that, right? So can you, since you say, well, I trust these systems generally speaking, you would trust one of those systems more than you would trust a politician, yeah?
oh yeah,
Okay. So what is so scary about saying letting a computer software, okay, manage financial resource systems?
if it were like a an open source, everyone can read it, decentralized kind of thing, then that would be very interesting to me.
And that's what I'm working on. It's difficult because not everybody's going to want to buy in, and so we have to make room for people for that. The same way that the Amish have a way to live too. And so that's to me that's the most important part about the future that's difficult for a lot of people to conceptualize because not everybody wants this. And I'm not God. I don't get to decide who gets to live the way they want to. I want everybody to be able to live free and have liberty. And that's not going to be an easy thing to define in 10 years when we're at a type 1 civilization. Things are going to change really rapidly. Think about how long it took from 1940 till 1970 when the microprocessor started to become big. And from 1970 to the 2000s when it absolutely changed everything on life on the face of Earth. Now we're in the 2000s just in 10 years. So by 2030, let's say.
We have holograms
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
records and
Virtual
everything.
reality. Yeah. Hmm. Artificial intelligent doctors that are just like the real thing, kind of like how we have Siri now, but it'll be a doctor. So you see the doctor looks at your stats. It's like, oh, you need to see this specialist, and it just dials you into a specialist anywhere in the world. I mean, all that stuff's coming, man. That's what I'm working towards. That's what the terminal's for. It's to make all that stuff move real smoothly.
Wow. I hope you're taking all the precautions and like making sure you don't get lost.
You know, I've taken as many as I can just to make sure that I get the word out because you can't just keep it to yourself. The world needs to know about it.
Right.
We need good news right now.
Yeah, we do. Wow. Okay. So, I probably don't even know what I don't know to ask you. Anything else that you'd like to cover?
um, I think that the most important thing in the future from this point forward is the one thing that mankind isn't doing and we haven't done is we're so focused on that 9 to 5, we're so focused on money, we're so focused on everything else in life, we forget to stop and smell the roses, to enjoy nature, to really enjoy what we've got here. Because I'll tell you, it's all
We're
a
just
gift, man.
surviving to live.
Yeah, man. And I'm fortunate enough. I'm kind of a farmer myself. I live out in the country. I enjoy the countryside and nature. We need to assess whether or not what we're doing as a whole and as a part. Each individual family is going to have to decide. Communities are going to have to decide. Societies are going to have to decide. Cities are going to have to decide, and so on. Whether or not technology, if implemented in their area, is going to lead to progress or the kind of progress that they really want. It's all about lifestyle from this
Sounds
point
like
forward.
it's something they can adopt and plug into over time. That the innovators will lead.
Correct. Yeah. And so the visionaries are going to come out of the woodworks all on their own, but that's going to be the most important step is saying, well, we don't want this. We want to be like M. Night Shyamalan's The Village, or we want to live the way that we're living right now, like in the 80s. Or we don't want this at all. We want to change lifestyle completely. We want to start a convent. There's going to be people that are going to do that.
But spirituality is a noble pursuit if you have nothing else to do with your
Yep,
time. I mean,
indeed. And
without
some of the most
without
amazing people in the world are very spiritual organizations.
yeah, and they have they don't want anything like possessions or anything. But what about you mentioned your 10-year mid-year plan, and I've only got a few minutes till my live show, but what do you have a path to market? Do you have a path to your first year like
Yeah.
laid out?
Okay, so what we're going to do, I work with an organization that's a think tank. It's a global think tank. We have an app that we just finished developing. It's going to be an ongoing development because we're taking user input so that we can basically fine tune the app and give users what they need. But the goal is that by 2021, we will be releasing a global publicly owned internet service provider. That's our goal. From starting from February next year until November 2020. And November 2020 is important. Mark it on the calendar because that's the presidential election. But it's also when our organization is planning and organizing a global labor strike. I'm really serious about it. Because basically what we're going to do is we're going to allow the people to make demands of their governments because the app lets them have free speech. It's like a voting system. It will allow people to collaborate and work together, and even talk with people that aren't necessarily of their own nation or nation states and create their own societies, etc. It's going to be really great.
Having a fair and honest and open source polling thing would just be useful in and of itself.
That's the idea behind the app. Yeah.
But okay, so when you say ISP, like you mean something new that's going to replace the traditional
Internet service provider. Yeah. Well,
ISPs?
because the cabal owns everything. There are three major players in the world, and there are they're really the same company. They're all owned by the same banks and the same people. But there are three major telecommunications organizations in the world. There's only three, and they own and run every ISP. And so, Clear Channel Communications, for example, they're like, oh, look, we own Cox and we own this and we own that. Well, that's great, but they're all the same. They're all just kind of wash into the same thing. What we're going to do is we're going to allow the public to decide openly and say, do they want their own internet service provider, which will be a publicly owned company or corporation. So it'll be like a trust that will be run in the same way that a credit union is run. It's owned by the people that actually have an account. So people will pay like a nominal fee, like $1.99 for their service, but that's just to make the computers and the systems that make everything work and work together. That's just to make it all run. We're not making any profit off of this. It'll actually run off of what's called a bankroll, which runs all in crypto. And that goes to our insurance company that will also be publicly owned, and the credit union, which will also be publicly owned. So
How do you prevent those people who run it from having too much power?
yeah, so there's five people in each trust, and the insurance company is a guild, and the guild is nothing more than a group of trusts. So people are going to start coming forward as they become more wealthy and so on, and they start their own companies. So they're going to want to become a part of a guild, an organization that kind of works towards their same goals, and that's what the lighthouse is all about. Is we're like a guild, a collection of trusts. So then if you don't have those goals in mind, you're going to be outed very, very quickly. People are going to realize that you're not really for the people, that you're not for these same goals. And so your trust isn't going to get trust. You're not going to get subscribers, right? People aren't going to subscribe to your services and your goods, your companies, and they're going to go bankrupt. It's as simple as that. And because it's a group of five, not one person will be able to hold all the power in the group or organization.
That's exciting, man. You've blown my mind. Really. I hope you can get 1% of this accomplished. I mean, you'll be remembered in history for 10,000 years.
Well, that's not my goal, but yeah.
Deserve it though. I mean, you'll have set mankind free, or whoever can get this kind of technology out there, whatever.
Well, what I would rather see is I would rather see the individuals that are going to make all this happen. I want to see them get recognized for what they're going to accomplish, because it's not going to be me. I'm just kind of the visionary that points in the direction and say, okay, this is how we can do it. And
Kind
people,
of like a Satoshi Nakamoto.
yeah, well, everybody else is going to make those decisions on their own, and that's really what I want. That's the definition of freedom to me. I don't want to set policy and say this is how you have to live, because that's what we have right now.
I like the way cryptos work in that if you disagree, you can prevent a split. There's no violence, there's no war, there's no oppression. You know,
And we can absolutely have a non-violent revolution. We can absolutely have an end to war. It's amazing.
yeah, first time in history that's possible. Brother, thank you so much.
Thank you
If
for
there's
having
any,
me.
I'm sorry.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, yeah. Anytime. Let's do this again. I'd like
Absolutely.
to get some updates and stuff. But
For sure.
is there any social media or anything that you'd like, the websites you'd like to plug and get the name out there?
Yeah, well, I've got my Twitter, my Minds, my YouTube, other social media outlets. I can get you that information. The Lighthouse, we're going to be doing some leak type activity, kind of like how Apple promotes their products. We're going to be doing little leaks over time to let people know what's going on, um, and you'll know it's us. So there's not going to be any question. We have nothing to hide, generally speaking. So
All right. If there's any links you got, I will put them in the description. And again, man, thank you for your time. I'm gonna run it and jump into my live chat for Sunday. But
yeah, take it easy, man.
yeah, all right. Now I've got to like shut all this down and go back.
Have fun.
Thanks for that. Yeah, thanks, man. Have a good day.
Great broadcast.
And we'll jump into it. Yeah, so you can just call me Alexander's Filth. You already did a pretty good introduction so far.